All right, welcome everybody to another episode of The Partnership. Today we have Bruno, head of partnerships at ARC and also formerly Oyster, who is joining us today to talk a little bit about his journey with Oyster. I'm going to drive right in. Bruno, can you tell us a little bit about what Oyster is and what kind of like led to the creation of the partnerships team at Oyster?
Yeah, well, first of all, friends, thanks for having me. So I guess like to get started on why Oyster and why it started there was that I started working remotely at the end of 2018, early 2019, and when I started working remotely at the time, it was pre-pandemic, right? So there was very few people that were doing it, and so I went through the hurdles myself of figuring out how to work for a UK company at the time out of Portugal. And so, talking to accountants, opening a business bank account, open an LLC, all these sort of things. I went through these problems, and I'm just trying to figure out what was going on. And then every month, always going through that process of like paying yourself, make sure the taxes are right, all these sort of things. And so, I figured out the process, but it was always a bit painful every month, and always a bit scary during like tax season. I'll be like, did I do everything right or not? Right? It was always a bit of that. Fast forward a couple of years working remotely at the time. The pandemic happens, and I started. Everyone started to go remote out of no options before, and so there was this shift in the way people were working now, and I started to see that working remotely could be very much the future, or at least it was a trend that was going to be a majority of the workplace now, and not just a minority like myself prior to that. And so, started to go deep into the global employment category and started to do a lot of research. And so ended up finding out about Oyster, through an event at the time, a virtual event actually, hosted by Hopin. And basically at the time,
Great plug.
find out about Oyster, reach out to a couple of investors that I knew that were kind of like, they knew the Oyster team. And they're like, yeah, they don't have partnerships. They're growing really fast. They just launched their product. I think it was live for like 3-4 months. So I reach out to the CEO and the CRO at the time, and just like, hey, this is me, like blah blah, a little bit about myself, working in partnerships in B2B SaaS. Here's a plan of things that I think Oyster should be doing on the partnership side. They immediately get back to me on the Thursday. It's like, hey, let's jump on a call. I jump on a call on Friday with the CRO. Jump on a call on Monday with the CEO, got a job offer on Tuesday. So it was a very quick process to get there. And the reason why, it was just like, it was very obvious for me, right? I started working remotely, so I knew before the pandemic, so I knew the struggles, right? I knew about the global shift in the pandemic, and, it was just like, felt like it was a great company mission alignment plus the product of what we're building. I could clearly understand the impact that would have on an employer and employee. And I understood what to do to get there, essentially.
Yeah, that's so fascinating, because I feel like, what kind of size was Oyster at, just to start with? Like, how big was the company when you decided?
I think it was around 30 people. Almost, they were about to announce the Series A. I think they announced the Series A like a month in. I was in. 30 people, very little revenue. I would say less than $1 million ARR at the time, if not just around that time. Very small company.
Got it. And so that's something which I am super fascinated about, and I feel like it's something which I want to spend more time on as well, is just to understand like how you went about pitching the CEO that partnerships was something that should be part of their business, right? Like, how do you land that gig as the first partnerships hire? Because I think it's rare that a CEO at that stage of a 30 people company might say like, oh, I want to like invest in partnerships. It's more likely that somebody like you will come along and go like, hey, you have XYZ problem, I can fix them with partnerships.
The funny thing is, I did it all over again with art. So it was very much, so it was very much the same process. I was, fast forward a bit more than 2.5 years at Oyster, and the company was like 15 partnerships people. We went from 1 million to over 60 million revenue, 600 employees, unicorn status. And I was like, I need to go back to building again. I need to go back to early stage. Started chatting with another group of VCs that I knew. And I really wanted to work now in the sense of like, I became a little bit of a T-shaped type of partnerships person where I very much generalist across the board and work on all types of partnerships, which I can go a bit more in depth. But then I
Yeah.
became a bit more enamored, I would say. I started my career in partnerships with integrations with Marketplace and Bubble, YC startup. But
Yeah.
I really became enamored with, the part that you would call the venture backed program. So working with VCs, incubators, and accelerators. And so I really wanted to work at a company where the core product would be to work with founders directly, to work with early stage companies and grow with them, do a little bit of the playbook that, Stripe has done quite well, for example, AWS. And so because of that, I reached out, talked about fintech in general, and came to be aware of ARC in a few like after a few conversations. Reach out to the CEO directly, said, "Hey, here's what you need to do. Here's what I think you should be doing." Got a conversation going, and fast forward a few months, and I'm working at ARC.
Yeah. That's so awesome because I feel like as a partnerships person, you might struggle to find a gig just because there aren't that many openings out there. But that's not for the fact that partnerships can't help. It's because there aren't enough, like there isn't enough awareness among the C-suite that they should invest in partnerships early, right? And
Yeah.
we actually got a question from the audience, and this is also a shout out to everybody who is watching right now, to leave your questions in the chat so we can discuss them with Bruno. But we have a question from the audience. Having been through Oyster's journey, when do you think is the best time for a startup to hire a partnerships person? I think that's a
Yeah,
great question because you were at 30 people. Like, do you think that's the right time? Is that too early? Maybe too late?
yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the easy answer is that there's no one. There's not an easy answer, right? Just because it depends a lot on the product, depends a lot on your ICP. One thing I can tell for sure is that it's never time to join as a partnerships person when the product hasn't found a product market fit. And if you're going to a company where the ICP will eventually change, but are you selling this product consistently to a customer base? Are you actively understanding why you're winning deals, why you're losing deals? Because if you're not going into a more of a well-defined structure in that sense, then partnerships are going to be chaotic, right? Because one of the things that I've been able to carve out my role as a first partnerships person at a couple startups now, but it's also not without a lot of struggles, because when you come in as a first partnerships person, and maybe you can relate, and maybe someone in the audience can relate, you're very much easily reporting to, most of the times, to the chief revenue officer, right, or directly to the CEO, or you're reporting to a unit that actually their goal is not your goal per se directly. Sometimes you're reporting to marketing, right? And so it becomes a very complicated thing to manage, because you need to understand that they might not see partnerships the way you see it. They might not even understand the potential. They don't mean like something wrong about it. It's just more like their priority. If a CRO, their priority is, we need to close more deals. We need to bring revenue. And partnerships is a long-term play. So it probably will be hard for you to show that right away, because you're not an account executive. You're not closing deals, right? You're just preparing, building a pipeline, bringing in leads and opportunities that will close at a higher rate, but it's a longer term play. And if you go to marketing cares about bringing leads, right? Bringing demand, just putting the solution in front of as many eyeballs as possible, which is not what partnerships does as well. We're not a glorified paid social activity. So it is very hard to go around it, but the indications that I follow are product market fit. If you have some type of revenue and you know where it's coming from and you know how it's going, so you have a repeatable sales process, you have a team of already a few customer facing people, because you're never going to be the first customer facing person, because it just doesn't make sense to be the first one in partnerships. And then the other indication I would be is just like, if you understand the product quite well, if you understand what's going on here. Because Oyster, it was a very much a product of its time, in the sense that I don't think Oyster would have gone for partnerships that early if it weren't during the pandemic, right? Oyster started before the pandemic, and so they weren't anticipating this crazy growth so quickly, right? And so the reason why it made sense with Oyster right away is that because we needed to compete with our competitors, and we needed to build integrations. We need to make sure we were in front of as many VCs and portfolio companies as possible, and we needed to keep up with the demand. But at a certain point, we even closed our inbound at Oyster because we had so many new business coming in, and that's crazy to think about that on today in 2023, right? But in 2021, it was the reality of things, and so it's very much about figuring out where the company is going and figuring out the early steps of success to go. But if you're looking for like a template, kind of like Series A below, probably is not a good fit.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. We've been in pretty much the same situation with Hopin. I mean, you alluded to it as well, but as a virtual events company during the pandemic, we blew up during that time and also struggled to just keep up with the demand and keep up with the inbound. And I think an interesting way to think about partnerships is that you give up control, like you sacrifice control in return for speed. And so if you have to grow really fast and you don't care as much about the control, like partnerships is probably the way to go if you're in an early stage as well, because you might not want to hire like a customer success team of 40 people, but there is an agency which can like do the implementation for you and they have 40 people. And so you can just leverage their team. It's not going to be your team. You don't have control over them, but it's a way of getting that team fast. And similarly with integrations, like you don't want to run payroll, for example, yourself necessarily in the beginning, but there is going to be a local payroll provider who can do this for you. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be like quicker than anything you could build yourself.
Definitely. No, and I think, yeah, it's hard to understand, but I think it's also enables you to stand out when you're the first partnerships person. Even today, like I do a lot of mistakes weekly. The thing is, the point is, you're moving up into the right? And that's the whole point when you join early in partnerships, is to make sure that whatever you're doing, you're moving the needle. Because you probably are gonna like a lot of different things are gonna fall in your lap, and you need to prioritize really well and need to understand that. And like you said, we're optimizing for speed very much in the beginning. There are a few things now that at ARC especially that I'm being a bit more conscious about nailing from the beginning, like partner attribution, lead attribution, like making sure Salesforce is updated and our wiki internal Notion pages are as well, because that was really painful as soon as we grew. But all these things are things that we're doing for the long term, but at the same time, you just got to bring speed to the table as partnerships. You just got to move forward.
Yeah. And I guess that's also a tale of the time, right? Because during COVID, like you were growing so fast, probably with Oyster, that like whatever you did, it felt like it was like impactful. Like it's not clear if it's like actually measurable, but you felt like it was working. So how did you approach like measurement of success in the early days? How did you define like, hey, partnerships is working? Maybe at Oyster and then at ARC now as well. Like how do you know you're on the right track?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the thing that I defined right away, I knew it from the beginning, was that I wanted to track pipeline right away. I wanted to make sure that I could essentially build the best possible way to track direct pipeline from partnerships from day one. And which is really hard to do, right? And I'm sure there's a lot of pipeline that fell through the cracks. There was a lot of, attribution fights with marketing, with sales, with whoever, right? But the thing that I wanted to do is that I wanted to make sure that we had a number and that we were attached to that number. The reason why I wanted to do that, and I'm not afraid to do it, is just because in a lot of companies and a lot of startups, everything that doesn't bring revenue in the beginning is seen as a cost center most of the times, and marketing is seen as a cost center in some startups. And it wasn't the case at Oyster, but I was protecting myself and my job by like, if I have a revenue or a pipeline number attached to me, then I can tell them directly that things are going well, and then I can protect my job in that sense, right? And I have this North Star that I'm like, whatever I'm doing, if that number is going up, then I know it's going well, right? And so tracking pipeline from the beginning was key. So what I did right in the beginning was working. We didn't have RevOps. We didn't have anything at the time. So I just basically started to create partner accounts, which were customer accounts in the beginning, which was a pain in the ass to change in the future with RevOps, and they hated me for a couple of months when they had to do it. But I essentially created partner accounts with the customer accounts on Salesforce right away, and created a bunch of lead sources that with an agency that we were working on the Salesforce implementation, and just make sure that whatever coming in that came via email, came via, for example, internal Notion pages that I just built because we didn't have a marketing team. I just built Notion pages with a special offer more information about us, share that with every partner. And that, but that those didn't have UTM links, right? So I had to build a much better offer that felt like the prospects were compelled to mention it to the sales team, right? And when they
Yeah.
mentioned the sales team, that's how I could tie it back to Salesforce and say that was a partner referral, or they would be introduced to me via email directly. And just put the pipeline and just like build the pipeline. And that's the beauty of working in B2B SaaS subscription. So you could just add it there and you could see that growth. And so that was the beginning. That's how I started from day one measuring pipeline right away. And then in the future, we evolved to measuring lead to opportunity conversion, like closed one, how much did they grow? And there was a few interesting things. So like, for example, we gave a very good discount on certain channels like the incubator and accelerator. And our revenue team would come up to us and say, hey, this is too good of a discount, we're losing money. And I was just like fighting with them for the first, like those last 3, 4, 5 months up until the year. And then you could just see, hey, yes, it's a good offer the first year, but now look how much they grow, and they grow without the offer. So the net retention was so great at the time, because with Oyster, you would employ one person. And then if you employ more people, you just come in and you just like grow and at an incredible pace. And so you was showing that growth was also very important at the end, showing that the net revenue retention was great. And these companies come in, sometimes an accelerator, come in with just one first developer that they hired in Brazil and they were in SF.
Yeah.
But then by 9 months later, they raised their seed round and now they have like 6 or 7 people, right? And so showing those statistics was very important. And then I started living in Looker, which is not fun, as everyone has used it, but that's how we did it.
Yeah. Super interesting. I mean, with Oyster especially, it's such a sticky product, right? Like it pays so much to be early. Like I totally see how the venture back model was like a really good route for you, because if you get early, like in early, even if the first hire is like heavily discounted, like by the time people have like 10, 20 hires, they still need your solution, right? They once these people are hired, they're not going to lay them off just because it's hard to pay them. So they still will need a employer of record. I think
No, exactly.
one thing I wanted to drill down a little bit more is like, how well defined was this plan when you pitched the CEO of Oyster or the CEO of Arc? Like, how well defined do you have to be in terms of like your measurements, your scope, and the opportunities? Like, did you already know like, hey, VCs or accelerators will be our target audience, or was that something you discovered on the way?
At Oyster, it was something that I discovered along the way. I came in with Oyster, my plan at the time, which looking back, I did put a lot of that plan into action at Oyster, which was crazy to see how much I was right in that sense, which was cool. And at Oyster, I got in because of building partnerships and building this model where we work with HRIS and ATS systems and equipment providers and incorporation companies, all these sort of things. And the venture back program was a surprise for me. It was like, oh wow, actually, because our persona when I came in was like HR folks, right? We're selling to HR folks, we're selling to people ops. And then I found out about this early stage founder ICP sort of, and we were like, oh, okay, we start to see some traction here. And at ARC, it was the opposite. It's the opposite. I knew exactly. I came in knowing that the bulk of it was going to be this venture-backed program. This is where I wanted to bring my efforts to it, is to build a really compelling program for VCs, incubators, and accelerators. And then all the other things are sort of like in there as well. Like obviously, one of the things that I'm struggling and I'm like battling and building right now at ARC is because we're a bank and because we can come in. We're not a bank, we're a software-driven banking platform, but because we can come in so early in the stage of a company, literally right after incorporation, we're there. And it's such a sticky product, and you can start today with 2 people and in 10 years, they have, 30,000 people in their company or whatever, and they're still keep the same bank, right? And so because of that, I wanted to build that strategy to get it as sticky as possible in the beginning. However, there's also the other, what I call non-sexy side of it, which is working with lawyers, working with accountants, and build these fractional CFOs and building all this rev share side of things, which is very tricky. At Oyster, we did it a bit more with like HR consultancy companies, with headhunters, for example, and it was more an affiliate play, which I need to build here at Arc. And that's the area where I knew it was going to be important, but I still don't know how to do it. Where it's like I'm going to keep like 20% of my time building it because I know it's going to yield results and it's a non-sexy part. And probably one day, as soon as we start to see results, I'll hire someone to take over that actually knows what they're doing. But I come in because I knew that the bulk of it would be the venture side. And so to build that and to define that, that was my scope initially here that I'm going with. When at Oyster, I completely moved from it because it took forever for us to launch the API and launch the integration. And so I just like, I wanted to bring results right away. So I started to look for all these other programs that I could just bring results. And I stumbled upon the VC side of things.
Yeah. I guess it's a good reminder to not commit to one path too early, right? Especially if you're the first partnerships hire, like you'll have to rapidly experiment. You'll have to basically
Yeah.
apply the lean startup to your partnerships program to figure out like who is my partner persona? Like who are the ideal customers? Where do they meet? How can I get in front of them at the right time? And if you like commit too early to one route and it turns out to be the wrong one, it's not going to work out. So you need to like quickly kill your darlings if you feel like an idea is
Yeah.
not moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and with the VCs it was very serendipitous because we had so many VCs coming to us that wanted to invest in us, and because I was so early in the company, I talked to the CEO daily. So
Yeah.
I was like, we were discussing this, and I was like, Tony, we should just make sure we make them work for us. Let's build an offer for them and a partner page, and say, hey, if you introduce us to a couple of companies in your portfolio, we'll chat. And so that's how it started. It was very like serendipitous in that way, and then it just evolved to a whole program with multiple people in it. So when I
Yeah.
left.
That's awesome. It's really strongly aligned with like, you know, what I call like the shadow partner program, where basically like there is a amount of like interest and amount of like attention already being directed at your company. In our case, it was event agencies, like Hop in Events was so popular among event agencies, but they were treated as customers, not as partners. And in your case, I guess
Mm.
it was the investors who were coming to you and were like, we really want to like invest in your business. And so there was already this attention. It's just about how can you turn it into something productive through a partnerships program rather than just letting that interest fizzle out or, you know, treating it more ad hoc.
Yeah,
Than,
yeah, for sure. Yeah, and and nailing that messaging was tricky in the beginning. That like you said, that shadow partnership type, which I love that expression. It made a lot of sense, and then it was like to learn how to scale it, right? Because for
yeah,
example, on the HR side of things, with you would be agencies, with us would be ad hunters, professional like HR consultancies and stuff like that. For us was like we make their job easier, as you hop and did on the event agency side, right? And so
yeah,
we make their job easier because now we expand the region that they can provide potential candidates to their companies. And so because of that, it was just like it's a very different mindset to work different types of partnerships on that. And in the beginning, it was really fun. After a year, when we started hiring, I was like, could now like I was just like, I'm done with this because it's such a like a context switching the whole day because you're always like trying to figure out, oh, now it's a call for this, now it's a partner for this, now, and it was just struggling after a while. But we got pretty good at like hiring very good people that knew how to work these types of channels and just like make sure that we were building a specialist in that area.
yeah. But it's interesting because as a first hire, you are the specialist in all the areas, right? Like you can't specialize on like a specific partner, but you really need to drill down in like the incentive of each one. Like the VCs were like their incentive was to help their portfolio companies grow in an efficient way. So that's why they wanted them to hire, for example, remotely abroad because it was a better way to spend the capital to just give them. Versus for the headhunter, there's a different incentive, which is like, hey, I can actually expand the pool of candidates I can send you,
Yeah.
so I can charge more commissions. You mentioned just now that there's specialization, and I think one part of the Oyster story which I find so fascinating is that the team grew to 15 people on the partnership side, right? So how was that structured? Like how was that specialization done? And what
Yeah.
what would you have done differently, or what worked really well?
Yeah, so I guess like I mean obviously this was not a one person job in that sense, right? Obviously I had a lot of help, and we started to hire a lot of senior people that oversaw like a bunch of the partnership side of things as well. But what what really helped, and I always say, is that I always did the job first. And because I did the job first, I knew what type of person I wanted to hire to do it, because I went through the struggles myself and I could understand on the interview process if that person knew what they were talking about, right? And so on the integrations, we hired an amazing person that worked at Workable for many years. So she knew exactly what was to build partnerships, integration partnerships within the HR tech space, right? So it was great. We went and grabbed someone from the industry that was pretty much doing that job and just like pulled them out and put it in Oyster. In the affiliate route, it was completely different. We wanted someone, I always had this thing on the back of my head that the best affiliate managers are the ones that work in the gaming industry, because it's always about nailing that 1% of 1%, because every result brings it. And so I wanted to bring someone that could build gamification systems, that could actually build a lot of collateral, but also could build a one-to-many type of program in the affiliate side, because not only we wanted to work with HR consultancy companies and headhunters, but we also wanted to work with like remote work specialists, influencers, blogs, stuff like that. And so we hired someone that wasn't industry specific, but knew exactly what they were doing. I remember at the time I signed up and started to build the implementation for Partner Stack to build the affiliate model. Went through it myself. It was like 3 months. It was so painful. We were paying so much money for Partner Stack, and I'm like going with our Salesforce agency to build on one side, going with the specialist team, implementation team at Partner Stack, and I'm like, what is going on? And then I hired this person, and in 1 week, he already had done it all, right? And he was just like, it was up and running, and he knew exactly what to do. He knew exactly how to handle the payouts, everything. And I'm like, all right, this is pointing in the right direction, right? And then we started hiring a few people that were a bit more specialist, but also a bit mission aligned. We hire, people across like in Canada, San Francisco, and in Seattle, in London, and these people were as specialists and drilled down in the industry, but they were people that understood the core of what Oyster represented, and they could actually build it around it. And so it was very, very interesting background of people. And then when we started to become a big boy, and we hired a program management person, because we hired 2 or 3 people where we didn't have a clear role. We just went through the interview process and we're like, we love this person, let's hire them. And we were just like, the times are different, but we were just able to grab these amazing people, and like, let's grab amazing partnerships people, and they'll figure out what to do and carve a role for them. And that's what happened, right? And we built a business service area out of it. We built a whole HR tech function, a whole talent function. We built all these sort of like different strategies that I couldn't even think of, or some of them I wanted to do it, but we just didn't have time, just because we hired willing people that actually were very much early stage in a lot of their partnerships team companies in the past. And they were like able to come in and like deal with all that mess, because, Oyster was 600 people after 2 years I was there, and 700 or something 2.5 years in, but we were still less than a 3-year-old company, right? And I think you can probably see that with Hubin as well.
Yeah.
So we were very much a startup in a lot of process. So we had to have someone that was able to deal with these big revenue numbers that we had, but also was willing to go through the whole, startup thing. And so it was just very much finding those type of people. And we were like, all right, these people are adults. They know what to do.
Yeah. It definitely resonates a lot. Like at Hopin, we always joke that it feels like being a toddler in an adult's body, because at some point we were like over 1,000 people, and we were only a 2.5-year-old startup. So it just felt like you were like really janky and like didn't move your arms right, etc. So there was a lot of learning which had to happen. One thing which really resonated what you just said right now is the idea that you should do the job first and then hire for it. Because I feel like a lot of, like, if I think about my own startup journey where I was a startup founder and hired, we would think about like a role, like for example, sales or something, and say like, hey, we should really get somebody into this role and hire somebody who knows how to do it. But then once that person started, you actually realize that the job requirement changed. Like it was different from what we assumed it would be. And the reason why was that we actually didn't do it ourselves first. So if we would have done it ourselves first, we would have realized like, hey, actually we need somebody with this background with that one. And so by doing it yourself, I think you can like avoid mishires a lot, because you can tailor your interview questions on specific cases where you go like, okay, have you worked with Partner Stack, for example, is like a great interview question after doing it yourself, because you're like, it's a real pain. And so if you know how to do it better, that's great. But if you hire like an affiliate person who's never worked with Partner Stack, that's probably not going to be the best fit. Or maybe you need to change Partner Stack, one of the two.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point. And it was a very big thing for us because all the partnerships people that we hired, they all stayed at the company. They none of them left. Right, I was the one to leave by the end, and so that shows that we hire well, but also we hired people that were willing to, because a lot of our jobs change a lot. I think I had like 4 or 5 different partnerships jobs while I was at Oyster for like less than 3 years, right? And a lot of these people were the same. And so being able to hire people that were like willing, I knew exactly where they wanted to come in and build it, but also were willing to go above and beyond their partnerships job description was key, right? And even at ARC, like for example, I'm the head of partnerships, but I'm a team of one person right now. And
Mm,
it's very easy to make a mistake where you hire a very seasoned person for a head of partnerships role, and then that person I'm sure it's a great manager and a great head of partnerships, but they're not able to do everything by themselves because they were managing people to do those things themselves, right? And they're really good managers, they're really good people organizers, and really good coaching uh, people and everything, coaches, but they were not good at doing the job anymore, and they're not willing to do it. Where I'm like, I come in with a head of partnerships role, but I knew exactly what the job entails right now, which is to build all these sort of things, figure out what works, what doesn't, and then we'll build a team. So I don't have
yeah.
an expectation of coming and just like, oh, because I have a head title, I want to manage people. That's just not my way of seeing things.
Yeah. You're in the business of getting things done. It doesn't matter how they get
Exactly.
done, who does them.
Exactly.
We're heading up on time, but before we leave, I just wanted to ask you a final question. That's what's your one big piece of advice for one person partnerships teams or for the first hire, somebody who's the first hire in a startup and wants to figure out the partnerships function?
Good luck. No, I guess like let me think. I feel like the best one would be the one that I mentioned briefly on the early on the call, which is make sure you have a North Star. Make sure that uh, that you have a North Star that is clear to the people that you're working with, especially the people you're reporting to, that you're doing the right things and things are moving up into the right. So to have that is always like collateral in terms of like, I know I'm doing a good job and now I can show it, because it's very easy in the beginning to understand if you're like, should I measure partner pipeline? Should I measure partner acquisition? Should I measure client sign? Whatever it is. But make sure that there's a combination of things of like there was a before and an after you at the company, and that will protect your job, but also make sure that you you are seen as a valuable piece to the company.
Yeah. Make sure there's the one number you can point at and go, look, I did it.
Yeah.
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 Awesome. That's a great piece of advice. We are on time, but thanks so much for joining, Bruno. And thanks so much for everybody who watched today live or as a recording. You could have been anywhere and you chose to be here with us. So I really appreciate you and your time. Thanks a lot, everybody. And see you in 3 weeks. We're going to take a break for Thanksgiving, but we'll be back in 3 weeks with another show. See you
All
then.
right, have a good one.